Hello everyone, this is Mrs. Wilson, sounding a little bit strange because my nose is still blocked after my surgery, but I thought it would be useful for me to talk through the communication exam for you. You've got absolutely nothing to worry about this first try through, this practice run next week. Yes, we'll make notes and we'll use our impression of your talk to help come up with your half-year grade. But really, it's a first try through so that you get a clear idea of what to expect. We'll do a proper mock exam, which you'll get a grade for, nearer the time of the real exam in February. So we're sort of doing extra. I know that it came a bit of a surprise, but I'm confident that we're fine to do this and you don't need to worry about it. Okay, so a rough outline. You can always pause this video and go back over things. This is how it works. I'm going to show you the rough outline and then talk you through each section. All right, so you have a preparation phase that's in a preparation room. I think next week you'll probably be on the corridor or we'll work something out. You get the materials that you're going to talk about, and you can bring pen and paper, and you get dictionaries, German English and English dictionaries. So you get 15 minutes, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Then you bring all your things, not the dictionaries, but your notes and the materials, the exam paper. You bring them through to the exam room, and the first student A, randomly selected, you don't decide, we don't decide. Student A has 5 minutes to talk about their materials and their sources and the topic that they're asked to talk about. Student B listens while that's happening, and then you switch. Student B speaks by themselves for 5 minutes. Then we'll say, okay, we're going to move on to the dialogue. And then student A and B have a dialogue discussion about the topic on the exam paper for 10 minutes. Okay, now we might, just so that we can fit everyone in next week in this quick run through, we might shorten those times a little bit. Makes it a bit easier for you as well. We've not quite decided yet, so we've not looked at the timing. Okay, so we've got a long stretch of hours to do it, but still everybody's exam takes 20 minutes. It might be a bit much. Okay, then more detail about this preparation phase. 15 minutes. Okay, 15 minutes. You get instructions, which are like exam questions, talk about whatever, and then materials. And these materials are the type of things you've encountered already in English. They might be political cartoons, they might be graphs and charts. Remember, we did some work on graphs and charts in one of the topics earlier on. And quotations. There might be photographs or infographics. They're, things that show data as a picture, is an infographic. There could be maps. That's another one that sometimes comes up, maps. Okay. Look at the materials, the text carefully, but also always make sure you read the instruction carefully. So let's say we take one of our recent themes. You might get a monologue that's specifically about global warming, let's say. Or it might be about climate change in general, which would include other things, wouldn't it? Or you might get a monologue that's about the harm done by traditional farming, industrial farming methods. And you want to be sure that you focus on that and not the alternatives. Do you see what I mean? You've got to read the instruction and respond to the instruction. Use a highlighter to highlight the instruction. Use a highlighter to highlight interesting things on the text that you're given. Then as you look at the exam paper with the sources, the materials, the text, as you look at that and the question, you should also have a piece of paper on the go to make notes. The more you have a sort of rough plan in your mind when you go into the exam room, the easier you're going to find it to talk for 5 minutes. Okay, use the dictionaries. You can do two things with those. You can find words to add to your own sentences when you speak, and you can also use them to work out the meaning of words that appear in the text that you're given. Now, you don't take the dictionaries into the exam, but remember, the beautiful thing about this exam is that spelling doesn't matter, because nobody's ever going to look at those notes. They're just for you to use in the exam. In the real thing, we collect them in as part of the paperwork for the exam, but nobody ever looks at them. They're not assessed or marked. They're just for you to help you. All right, so when you look at the source materials, make sure you're making interesting comments about them. So if there's a cartoon, what's the joke in it and how does that work? Is it effective? Is it funny? Is it clever? What's the point the cartoonist is trying to make? What's the most shocking statistic on a graph? Remember, you can round up numbers and round down numbers. Instead of 2.98 million, you can say almost 3 million. What's the most shocking thing that you can see on this graph? Excuse me. And then if it's a quotation, how can I put the message of this quotation into my own words? So your paraphrasing skill again that you've worked on for the text-based composition comes in really handy here. Okay, you should also notice where these materials, these texts come from, the source of the source materials, because sometimes that will reveal a bias. So, for example, we know that the Times newspaper is a left-leaning political newspaper. Left-leaning politically. We know that if Donald Trump says something, we know he's a populist. We know he's fairly right-wing in his views. So the source of the materials is important. Okay. And you might want to comment on it. Make sure that in this 15 minutes you've got your eye on the clock, because you also need to make some preparations for the discussion section. Because yes, you'll be discussing with your partner then, but just to have some key ideas and key words to keep the discussion going is very, very useful. Don't forget to prepare for the discussion. You take your exam paper and all your notes into the exam room. Okay, tips for the monologue. You can pause the video and make some notes or have a look. I'll just talk you through them a little bit. This is a really good basic structure. Look, first of all, introduce the topic in your own words. This is a good idea because in doing that, it makes you focus on the question you've been given. So if it's a thing about global warming, when you have to express that in your own words at the beginning, you're not going to get distracted by climate change in general or by things that cause pollution. You're going to be focused. If you start off like that, you're going to be focused on global warming. Okay, then make sure you talk about all three source materials. You can do whichever order you want, but make sure you describe, and then a little bit like the task you did, you submitted to Teams for me while I've been off. Make sure you describe what you see that's relevant. Make sure you talk about the message, the effectiveness, the comedy, whatever, but have something interesting to say about all three. Don't ignore any of them, especially not if one's harder. You know, it's there to see if you can handle it. So have something. It doesn't have to be that you're absolutely sure about your interpretation. Communicating means that you can express, for example, from my perspective, I think the cartoonist is trying to say, or you can say, perhaps the cartoonist is trying to say. Okay, then when you've dealt with all three materials, you can expand your comments beyond the materials, say more about the topic or the issue. Do you agree with what the materials say? Have you got any specific views about it? Do you know anything more about this issue? Can you explain why it's controversial at the moment? Do you know any recent developments or news stories? So you're sort of thinking beyond them, and then you can have a more general, you can talk more generally about the topic you've been given. Okay, then it's important to realise this is not a planned presentation. This is a monologue. And so the shape of it and the structure, although it's got to be logical so we can follow it and to help you fill the time, it doesn't have to end perfectly in a lovely conclusion. If you come to a conclusion, fantastic. But if not, it might be that we have to interrupt you and say, okay, thanks very much. That's your 5 minutes. You don't lose marks for that. That's not a bad thing if we have to stop you. Neither do you get extra marks because it looks like you're going to go on for half an hour. No, but you see what I mean? You're not coming to a neat conclusion. This green note at the end, some of you might want to read this and just see. So I've seen some people do this exam where instead of following the structure of the source materials, they've planned their own monologue about the topic that they've been given, and then they've slotted the source materials into what they want to say, almost like using the source materials as quotations in a written piece. Now, you don't have to do that to get 14 or 15 points, but it might make sense to some of you. I would advise you not to try that this time, because you can still access, this time, you can definitely access the higher grades if you just deal with the source materials and then say more about the topic. Okay, going on a bit. Okay, dialogue and discussion, the conversation afterwards. As I said, student A and B are randomly assigned, so you should all be ready to be student A, really. Student A always starts, so prepare some opening phrases for that. Just say something along the lines of, okay, I'd like to discuss the effect of plastic pollution in our oceans today, or I'd like to discuss single-use plastics, and then have something to say. But it's fine to openly and clearly manage the discussion. It's fine to pass over to your partner saying, what do you think of that? Or have you got anything to add? It's fine to have those really explicit manager discussion phrases in there. The whole thing should feel quite natural. You can agree, you can disagree, or you can arrive at somewhere in between. Sometimes people find it easier to disagree. They feel there's more to say. You're not very often given a perspective. You're not very often told, you think this, you think that. Usually it's left so that it's more general, but sometimes that does happen. But I think we'll deal with that after this practice run. Okay, prepare strategies for handing the conversation over to the other student. Prepare strategies for politely interrupting, which is called taking the floor. You take control. Make sure that you stick with what you've been asked to talk about. Don't go on about other things. Don't go back to the materials that you've had in your monologue, because that's done, that bit. This is a more open conversation. Listen carefully to the other student. It shouldn't feel as if A says something, B says something, A says something else, B says something else. It should feel as though A says something and B builds on it or comments. B says something and A disagrees. Do you see? It's almost like a little game of tennis where it's going back and forth, but it feels as though you're cooperating. Okay, not two separate conversations. If you feel as though you've said enough about the whole topic, don't just stop. Think of something that you could talk about that's related. So let's say it was about plastic pollution in the oceans, or single-use plastics. You could go on to talk about electronic waste or waste in general if you needed to, because you felt you'd run out of things to say. And remember, you don't have to be the world's greatest expert on any of the topics. You just need to hold an intelligent conversation, follow the instructions, and have interesting things to say. Okay, again, a reminder that this is a run through for your benefit, so that before you go away for the summer, you'll know what to expect when we come back in September, and what's coming in February. Okay, I think that's it. And I will see you on Tuesday. If you've got questions based on this video, please feel free to send me a quick email and I will answer those questions to the best of my ability. All right, bye.